The email from the editorial office reached the journalist early in the morning, at 6:43 a.m. There was no greeting, no introduction. Just a short phrase. "You're going to Washington. You have an interview with the Vice President, Kamala Harris. The White House. An interview." He read the message 3 times before he realized it wasn't a joke or a mistake. An offer like this comes once in a lifetime, and usually to someone else. While he tried to remember where he had put the only suit appropriate for such an occasion, topics were already flashing through his mind: inflation, the labor market, the energy crisis, export prospects. But soon he understood, that wasn't enough. He wouldn't just be asking questions. He would have to listen between the lines. A real interview isn't about numbers. It's about the person who says them. Washington greeted him with a gray sky and a wind that felt too official. As if even the air knew that everything here was not like in other cities. A representative from the administration picked him up, a short man in glasses who introduced himself simply as Mark. He spoke dryly and briefly, like someone who had instructions but no time. The car drove past iconic buildings, and the journalist silently watched the places he had only seen before in news feeds. They arrived at the White House. Pass, security, metal detectors, inspection. Strict, but quick. After signing a non-disclosure agreement, he was led down a long corridor to one of the working rooms where the interview would take place. The room wasn't ceremonial, no gilding, no pomp, but it was cozy. Armchairs, a glass table, books on economics and international relations on the shelf. He settled by the window, checked his recorder, took out his notebook. A few minutes remained. Outside, the south lawn stretched out green, familiar to millions of Americans. With each passing second, his heart beat faster. He knew, this chance would not come again. Kamala Harris entered confidently, without an escort. She wore a modest light blue blazer, neatly styled hair, minimal makeup. She extended her hand, smiled easily, and said, "Hi. Thanks for coming. Let's talk." There was no theatricality in her voice. Rather, a calm, teacher-like confidence. As if she hadn't come to defend or sell ideas, but to discuss reality. Just as it is. The interview began with a routine question. How would you assess the current state of the American economy? Harris leaned back slightly and tilted her head. It's a difficult period. But the economy isn't a fixed value. It's a process. It's the country's breath. Right now, we're in a phase of recovery. And for me, it's important that every American understands, behind growth percentages are not just charts, but lives. Real people. That's what matters most. The conversation moved to specifics: employment data, inflation levels, wage growth. But every time, even when talking about numbers, Kamala Harris returned to stories. About a family in Michigan whose small business survived thanks to government support. About a woman who changed professions after the pandemic. About a student who launched a startup in green energy. These weren't just report examples, they were fragments of a living economy. If we don't make the economy accessible to everyone, we're just counting empty numbers, she added. For me, every program, every reform must be tied to a real person, not just a line item in a budget. The journalist noted, the vice president avoided criticizing her opponents. But between the lines, it was clear, she understood that economic problems had been building up for decades. And no administration, not even the most ambitious, could solve them in a single term. After 15 minutes of formal discussion, the atmosphere shifted. Kamala Harris no longer spoke like a politician on camera. More like a mother, a citizen, someone who carries responsibility and knows the weight of her words. When you look at the future of the economy, as a politician and as a person. The journalist asked his next question, what matters most to you? She paused for a second. Stability, she said. The ability to plan. Parents shouldn't be thinking about tomorrow's gas prices, but about how to send their child to college in 5 years. That's what a reliable economy means. It was impossible not to notice, Kamala Harris wasn't choosing her words carefully. She spoke deliberately, but not rehearsed. Her voice conveyed that each phrase had already been lived through. Perhaps because she had said them before, not from podiums, but at meetings, on trips, in city libraries or factory cafeterias. Eventually, an aide politely reminded them that the time was running out. Kamala looked at her watch and turned to the journalist. "Is there a question you didn't dare to ask?" He hadn't expected that. But he asked. "What truly worries you about the future of the U.S. economy?" "The loss of trust," she answered immediately. "Not in the government, not in the market. But in the very idea that work matters. That effort is not in vain. The economy isn't sustained by stock indexes, it's sustained by confidence. If we lose that, we lose the country." As she said goodbye, she smiled again and added, "Thanks for the good questions. I hope you write this in a way that lets readers see the people behind the numbers." He left the White House not with euphoria, but with the feeling that he had visited a workshop, where not politics, but the future, was being assembled. He didn't take a photo at the gates. Didn't record a story. Instead, he sat in the car and opened his notebook. He knew, this story called not for noise, but for silence. And thoughtful reading. 2 days had passed since the interview, but the editor still hadn't received a draft. He had called, texted, left voice messages, the journalist didn't respond. And it wasn't about the deadline. He sat over his notebook and recorder as if facing something much larger than an article. Kamala Harris's words echoed in his head, clearly, as if she had just said them. He had listened to the recording 6 times already, and each time he found something new, in the tone, in the pauses, in the phrasing. It wasn't an interview. It was a confession in numbers. "When you talk about recovery," he had asked then, "what does that mean in the context of the last 3 years? The pandemic, inflation, supply chain disruptions, technological failures." Kamala Harris folded her fingers, looked away, and answered without a hint of evasion. "It means recognizing that not everything will go back to the way it was. And that's not necessarily a bad thing." According to her, the crisis was both a catastrophe and a catalyst. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the vulnerable points of the system: unequal access to healthcare, the fragility of supply chains, dependence on foreign markets, and low digital literacy in rural areas. People didn't just lose jobs, she continued. They lost their sense of footing. Their routines, their social networks, their ability to plan. We weren't just rebuilding the economy, we were rebuilding trust. One of the key points in the conversation was the Small Business Assistance Program. Kamala recalled how, in the early months of the pandemic, thousands of cafe owners, auto repair shops, and bookstores were literally fighting for survival. Bureaucracy and fear went hand in hand. People didn't know if they'd be able to pay rent, keep staff, or maintain basic operations. We knew that small business wasn't just about economics. It's the street, the neighborhood, the city. If it disappears, so does the middle class. That's why the vice president insisted on making the subsidy and loan system as simple as possible. Digital platforms were launched, trainings were held in Spanish and other languages, and local banks were brought in. She was especially proud of how quickly the rejection rate in marginalized communities was reduced. For the first time in a long time, the pandemic made us talk about the economy in the context of justice, Harris noted. Inequality became visible to the naked eye. She also touched on the labor market. In 2020, she said, millions of people realized their professions could disappear in a week. It sparked a wave of anxiety, but also curiosity about retraining. People stopped clinging to the way things were. They started asking themselves, what if I can start over? The administration responded with grants for retraining, investments in college partnerships, and support for IT schools in small towns. Kamala cited an example from Ohio, where former subway drivers became solar panel maintenance engineers. We shouldn't be afraid of change. We should be preparing people for it. When the topic of stimulus checks came up, Harris didn't go into defense or justification. She spoke clearly. Yes, the decision was expensive. Yes, it wasn't perfectly targeted. But, in her words, in chaos, what matters most is speed, not symmetry. I saw letters from people who used that check to buy an inhaler for their child or pay their last month's rent. In moments like that, you realize, sometimes the economy is just money sent on time. He noticed how the vice president, almost mechanically but sincerely, kept repeating the same idea: the economy is not an abstraction. I'm against describing the economy only in terms of GDP and unemployment. We need to learn to listen to how a person feels when they lose their income and are told that the inflation rate is acceptable. Kamala Harris paid special attention to women in the economy. She said the pandemic hit them hardest, especially single mothers. Daycares shut down, schools went online, and millions of women were forced to leave work. This wasn't a women's issue. It was a national issue. When a woman drops out of the economy, GDP suffers. A generation suffers. The tax system suffers. In response, the administration offered child care subsidies, tax credits for families with children, and incentives for employers to hire mothers with flexible conditions. Toward the end of the second part of the interview, the journalist dared to ask a personal question. Have you ever felt like the system might not hold? Kamala Harris didn't answer right away. She took a sip of water, looked out the window. Then she said, yes. In March 2020. When doctors were calling in panic, and the economy simply wasn't there. Just spreadsheets with negatives. Just fear. That's when I thought, if we don't do everything we possibly can right now, we'll lose a decade. Not economically. Humanly. After the interview, he stepped outside and noticed, the city breathed differently. People were going about their day, discussing street concerts, buying coffee. And all of it was the economy. Not stats in a report. But footsteps, voices, handshakes. He realized, the story he would write wouldn't be a dry piece for the economics section. It would be a chronicle. A modern-day account of how a nation that had lost its bearings was searching for a new path. The third day of the interview began more quietly. Kamala Harris entered the hall wearing a gray pantsuit, unaccompanied and without a phone. On the table, only a glass of water and a folder with notes. She sat across from the journalist, held his gaze a moment longer than usual, and was the first to ask a question. Are you ready for a serious conversation? He nodded. The recorder clicked softly again. And immediately came a statement that didn't sound like an introduction. The economy no longer stops at the border. We live in a world where every container in Shanghai affects working hours in San Diego. According to the vice president, China has been the central topic of internal White House meetings since early 2021. But not as a threat, rather, as a challenge, structural, systemic, and long-term. We can't ignore China's economy. But we also can't let it set the rules. The issue isn't competition as a zero-sum game. The issue is, who sets the pace? Harris admitted that the sharpest debates weren't about tariffs or exports, but in the field of technology. Artificial intelligence, semiconductors, telecommunications, that's where the future is being decided. Victory doesn't go to the one with the most resources. It goes to the one most determined to invest in the future, she said. Kamala focused in detail on the CHIPS and Science Act, passed to strengthen domestic chip production in the U.S. If you knew how many hospital systems depend on a single semiconductor, you'd understand, this isn't just about iPhones or electric cars. It's about sovereignty. She recalled how in 2021, a single disruption in chip supply halted car manufacturing from Detroit to Texas. And how dependence on Taiwan became not just an economic, but also a military concern. A country that doesn't produce key technologies becomes a hostage to someone else's decisions. We couldn't allow that. The journalist noted that in U.S. international rhetoric, the word leadership is once again being heard more often. He asked whether the very idea of American leadership in the world is outdated in an era where every region is following its own path. Harris didn't respond immediately. Then, with precision, leadership isn't dominance. It's the ability to set a standard. We want to be first not because we need recognition, but because if not us, then who? She reminded him how in the 20th century, the U.S. set the course in fighting poverty, promoting vaccination, and exploring space. Now, she believes, it's time to set the pace in energy, technology, and human rights. If we don't develop ethical principles for AI, someone else will. And that might not be the future we want. From technology, they moved to energy. Kamala was clear, oil and gas will remain part of the equation for a long time, but the future lies in green sources. Climate is economics. A drought in California raises food prices. Flooding in Louisiana hits insurance markets. If we want stability, we need a transition. And we need to lead it ourselves. According to her, the U.S. has invested billions in wind and solar energy, in developing hydrogen solutions, and in infrastructure for electric vehicles. Still, she admitted, the resistance is strong. This isn't a matter of belief. It's a matter of balancing interests. And our job is to convince people that a green future doesn't eliminate jobs, it creates them. She mentioned former coal mining regions where battery plants have opened. The key, she said, is not just to offer a new job, but to give people a sense of future. On geopolitics, Harris was candid. The conflict in Ukraine and tensions in Taiwan have caused not only military but also economic shocks. The world has become fragile. And economic resilience is not only about internal reforms, it's also about diplomacy. We live in an era where every crisis over there instantly hits your gas bill. She gave a simple example. In 2022, when fertilizer prices rose due to the war in Europe, it affected crop yields in Arkansas. And that, in turn, impacted the price of bread in New York. We can no longer afford the luxury of indifference. At the end of the meeting, she shared a story that hadn't made it into the official reports. In 2023, during a visit to the Munich Security Conference, Kamala met a young engineer from Poland. He asked her, "Do you really believe the U.S. can outplay China and keep peace at the same time?" She replied, "We don't have to outplay someone else. We have to outplay who we were yesterday." That phrase stuck with the journalist for a long time. He left the building where the interview had taken place with the feeling that he hadn't just spoken with a politician, he had listened to the ticking of a clock by which a whole nation measures the rhythm of the world. The more he replayed the recordings, the more clearly he understood, today's America isn't a country that has returned. It's a country deciding what it will become. Day 4 of the interview didn't begin in the press briefing room, but in a smaller office in the White House, its windows overlooking the East Garden. Kamala Harris invited the journalist to take a seat in an armchair, while she settled in across from him. The interview began without formalities, like a conversation between two people who had too little time and too many topics to cover. "Today I want to talk about people," she said. "Not about approval ratings or GDP growth charts. But about those for whom these numbers either mean everything, or nothing at all." The first question from the journalist concerned income inequality. He cited data showing that the top 10% of Americans own over 70% of the nation's wealth. Harris nodded without interrupting, then responded firmly. "If we don't address inequality, the economy will break down. Not because of a crisis, but because we'll lose trust." She gave a simple example, a woman in Baltimore working 2 jobs still unable to afford health insurance. Or a delivery driver in Oklahoma whose mortgage jumped by 40% after an interest rate hike. How do you explain to them that the economy is growing? They don't feel it. Harris emphasized that justice is not an ideology, it's infrastructure. Without justice, sustainable development is impossible. That's why she spearheaded a recovery package based on an equity-first principle, prioritizing vulnerable groups. This isn't about handouts. It's about leveling the playing field. If one person starts from 5 floors below ground and another from a penthouse, they don't have the same chances. The journalist asked which initiatives she considered key in the fight against inequality. Her answer was direct: affordable healthcare, quality education, and small business support in underserved areas. The economy doesn't start on Wall Street. It starts in a neighborhood clinic. She spoke about her time as California's Attorney General, when she saw firsthand the consequences of shutting down free health facilities. People, unable to access timely care, would enter the system later, at a greater cost. In the end, the government paid more. We spend billions on consequences instead of investing in root causes. One of the most emotional moments came when the topic turned to systemic racial inequality in the economy. Harris, the daughter of immigrants from India and Jamaica, didn't hide her personal connection to the issue. I've seen talented kids from low-income areas without access to computers. I've seen young black entrepreneurs denied loans simply because of their zip code. She pointed to microfinancing programs, grants for IT and STEM education, all launched by the Biden-Harris administration for these communities. This isn't a charity program. It's an investment in the future. A separate part of the discussion focused on the demographic shift. Harris shared the facts: in the next 20 years, the Latino population will become the largest ethnocultural group in the U.S. The population is aging. Young people are increasingly choosing hybrid work. The economy of the future will be multicultural and multifaceted. And if we don't adapt our institutions, we'll lose millions of talents. She added that education should be ahead of the economy, not trailing it. That's why investing in early development, teacher training, and debt-free college access is so crucial. If a degree turns into a debt trap, it's not education, it's a snare. Kamala Harris also touched on mental health and burnout, particularly among young Americans facing unprecedented challenges in the 2020s economy. We can't demand productivity from a nation that's emotionally exhausted. We must treat mental health as seriously as inflation or employment. According to her, expanding access to therapy and digital mental health platforms is one of the administration's top priorities for the next 2 years. In closing, Harris shared a story from a visit to Arizona, where she met a college student who worked nights as a waitress, studied during the day, and ran an online jewelry business. The girl said, "I'm not looking for an easy life. I just want my hard work to mean something." Kamala fell silent. She looked out the window. Then, turning back to the journalist, she said, "The economy isn't just numbers. It's opportunity. And until every person in this country feels that they matter, we haven't done our job." That evening, the journalist didn't transcribe the recording right away. He stared at his laptop screen, where headlines scrolled: Dow Jones, plus 0.43%, unemployment down, Fed plans to hold interest rates steady. But now he understood, behind those headlines were faces. And the vice president refused to forget that. The interview continued, but now it shifted to an even more global level. The questions not only addressed internal economic issues in the United States but also the country's role in the world, its future challenges, and its responsibility to its citizens and humanity. Kamala Harris began answering, reflecting aloud both as a politician and as a person. "When you talk about the future of democracy, how do you see its evolution in light of economic changes?" asked the journalist, and her gaze became more focused. She paused for a moment before responding. "Democracy is not just a mechanism of governance, it is a value. And at every turning point in history, especially when the economy is changing as rapidly as it is today. We must ask ourselves, how do we preserve and strengthen this value? She said, her voice conveying confidence, but also a hint of concern. In the 21st century, democracy will be tested like never before. We see growing discontent, increasing polarization. The economy is the foundation of stability, and if it doesn't serve all citizens, but only the privileged few, then it harms not only the economy but democracy itself. Harris's response addressed not only the political side but the social one as well. Kamala spoke about the digital divide, about how new technologies and opportunities, like artificial intelligence and blockchain, can improve lives but also create new barriers. Technology in the hands of a few can be a powerful tool for strengthening democracy, but it can also destroy it if we do not watch who is using it and how, she explained, paying attention to digital platforms, algorithms, and their influence on societal processes. She noted that the digitalization of the economy was creating new challenges related to data security, privacy, and ethical issues. Problems like the monopolization of technologies or the manipulation of public opinion with digital tools should become a priority for regulators. The journalist clarified that, given the accelerated digitalization and global changes in the economy, the U.S. might face a series of challenges in the labor market. Kamala responded that adapting the workforce to these changes required strong and thoughtful policies. Her eyes showed how important this topic was to her. We must understand that new technologies are changing the structure of labor. Automation doesn't just affect industrial enterprises. It touches offices, the service sector, and thus entire professions. And while we must support innovation, we cannot allow technology to become the cause of mass unemployment or worsening working conditions, the vice president emphasized. She shared how, in recent years, the administration had been working on modernizing the education system, implementing retraining programs for workers in sectors affected by automation, and expanding access to education in cutting-edge technologies. But, according to her, this was not enough to keep up with the pace of change. It's not just a matter of creating jobs. It's about creating jobs that are decent and fulfilling. We must ensure that everyone, regardless of their social background, has the opportunity to work in this new world. Shifting to a more global perspective, Harris touched upon the U.S. role on the international stage. It is no secret that, for the past few decades, the U.S. has remained a leading force in the global economy, but now, with the growing influence of China and other countries, the future of the world will depend on how the U.S. adapts to these changes. We must play an active role in shaping a new world order based on fairness, sustainability, and cooperation. And this is impossible without respect for global standards. The U.S. must be a leader, but not a dictator, she said. We must work with other countries to create a more just economic system. The interview continued, but Kamala Harris increasingly returned to the topic of global security and environmental challenges, discussing them as an essential component of the international economy. In her view, success in the economy is impossible without attention to environmental issues. You cannot build a strong economy on a dying planet. A green economy is not just a trend, it is the foundation of the future. The U.S. must lead the transition to renewable energy sources and the global fight against climate change. She also mentioned that the government had already invested billions of dollars in clean energy infrastructure, including projects to modernize electrical grids and support the production of green technologies. The question of the future of democracy arose again when the journalist reminded her of the crisis of trust in political institutions in the U.S. Kamala, acknowledging the problem, offered her vision. Democracy can and should be more inclusive. We must build trust through direct engagement with citizens, through constant development of political culture, through expanding rights and real opportunities for all. Only then can we preserve not only stability but also the dignity of every American. In conclusion, Harris said that everything she had talked about was not just about the economy but about the future of the country, where every citizen could feel part of the whole, where technology serves not only the interests of corporations but of people. This is not only our economic choice. It is our moral choice. The journalist turned off the microphone, feeling that much of what Kamala Harris had said would have long-term consequences. Not just for the political stage, but for every citizen whose life could be changed by the decisions made today. In the final moments of the interview, Kamala Harris began to speak about the future of America, which she saw not only as a country but also as part of the global community. Her words carried an unwavering confidence that there was still much work to be done, but she believed in the country's ability to face challenges. The journalist asked her about her vision for the future, based on what she had discussed regarding the political situation, the economy, and digital transformations. Kamala paused for a moment, smiled, then responded in a full voice. "I believe in America. We have the power to rethink our place in the world and build a country that will serve as an example to others. But to do that, we must move forward with open eyes, ready to listen and make decisions that will require courage and leadership." She continued, focusing on the new opportunities that America could seize in the period of global change. "Our future is a future based on global cooperation, where the United States will not only look inward but also at the world around it. We must act as a country that knows how to balance its interests with the needs of other nations. After all, there is no room for isolationism in the global economy." She pointed out that America itself must also become more inclusive. She understood that the role of politicians is not only to predict the future but also to actively create conditions for that future. "It's important that in the coming years, we reassess many of our established views. For example, economic inequality, which is increasingly causing social instability. We cannot afford to be indifferent to improving the lives of every citizen. The reforms we are working on now must lead to a reality where everyone feels a real opportunity for growth." The journalist asked how she saw America's role in global conflicts and changes related to global politics. Kamala responded with confidence, stating that the U.S. must play the role of a stable partner, not dictate terms but be an active participant in international negotiations. "We must work with our allies and partners to solve global problems, whether it's climate change, peaceful conflict resolution, or ensuring stability in the global economy. It's important that the U.S. is oriented toward cooperation, not confrontation," she said. "We must not forget that the world is constantly changing. Our role as a global leader must be based on the principles of fairness and sustainability." In the following minutes, the conversation shifted to the topic of the younger generation and its impact on the future of the U.S. Kamala spoke with enthusiasm about the importance of investing in education and providing young people with all the opportunities for development and self-expression. "Today's youth is a generation that knows no boundaries. This is a generation that operates in a digital world. They are more open and more engaged in social processes. We need to support their initiatives and create opportunities for their growth," Kamala said. "Because if we do not trust them with the future, they will not be able to live up to it." The last questions focused on human values and social priorities. Kamala spoke about the importance of strengthening family values, caring for the elderly, and those who find themselves in disadvantaged social positions. "If we want to be strong, we must be strong as a society. A country that cares for its citizens, their safety, health, and well-being is a country that will be successful," she said, her words resonating with the audience. She emphasized that the most important tasks remain education, healthcare, and, of course, overcoming economic and social barriers. Kamala did not rule out the possibility of future reforms aimed at creating a fairer system and improving the quality of life for all Americans. "We are at an important stage. We are at a turning point, and this is not just a moment in politics or economics. This is a moment in the life of a nation. We can become a country that corrects its mistakes and creates conditions for prosperity, but for that, we must move forward. And it will be a difficult path, but it's worth it," she said. When asked about her personal ambitions and goals, the Vice President of the United States, as always, responded in a restrained but confident manner. "I have always set myself the goal of working for the good of the country and its citizens. My main aspiration is to ensure a future in which every American, regardless of their background or status, will feel part of something larger and important." I believe in democracy, in the opportunities it provides. And I am confident that the future is ours. As the interview came to a close, silence filled the room. Kamala Harris, aware of the importance of every word, once again confirmed her dedication to the cause and her readiness to move forward, despite the challenges and uncertainties of the future. The journalist finished recording, knowing that this interview would be discussed for a long time, as one of those shaping the vision of the future not only for herself but for an entire generation.